Here's how we'll go this evening. We'll go ahead and let Nate give his defense presentation. Everyone will go on mute during his presentation. When Nate is done, we will have a couple of rounds of questions. And once we have asked all of our questions, we will ask Nate to step away from his computer. We will then decide whether Nate has a pass with changes, or a fail. I will text Nate, tell him to come back. We will give him the results, and then we will all celebrate. Nate, one thing you will need to do this evening after we're done is to post your PowerPoint up into TK20. And then each of the committee members has 24 hours from then to do their evaluation of your both your PowerPoint presentation and your presentation this evening. And then I know I posted in the classroom the next steps, but we can go over that just between the two of us for the next steps for getting things submitted to the school and your graduation taken care of.
Yeah.
Okay.
And by the way, I do see a little a sign up there saying recording has started. So.
Okay. Yep. I've got the recording going.
Okay.
So awesome. Wonderful. All right. If there are not any other questions, I will go ahead and go on mute and turn my camera off. And Nate, the floor is yours.
All right. I'll make this really big here. Okay. Can you see it? Okay.
Yes.
So my topic is diversity and leadership in organizational effectiveness, a qualitative explanatory case study. And during this presentation, we will discuss the problem statement, purpose statement, method and design, population and sample, research questions, conceptual framework, literature review, synopsis, instrumentation, data collection, data analysis, findings, recommendations for leadership, conclusion. If you have any questions, I'll receive questions and answer your questions. Introduction. Diversity disparity in senior leadership is a global problem. It's a problem among many industries. When I was doing the research, it's the lack of inclusion limits communication. Because of that disparity, there's a lack of inclusion. Many people have diversity, but I think that they have issues fostering inclusivity. The numbers are there, the diversity are there, the faces are there, the races are there, the different demographics, but there are issues with promoting inclusivity, because you still have the many different demographics or different people from different backgrounds still feeling isolated. So that's still a problem. Leaders do not fully understand how to manage diversity. Based on my research, I found that out, and it was very insightful that leaders are struggling with the management of diversity. Diversity gap spans across global markets. As I stated earlier, minorities are underrepresented in senior roles, although we do have some, and we've made some progress over the years. We've come a long ways, but we still got a ways to go. So therefore, there's an urgent need to address the diversity gap, hence the reason I'm here today. The problem statement. The problem was the disproportionate diversity composition in senior leadership limits cultural competence, limits diversity of a workforce, and restricts organizational performance. And you will see as we progress through the presentation that the problem statement, the purpose statement, and the research statement, the research questions are all aligned. The professors, you guys, you couldn't beat that in me enough. They got to be aligned. So they are. The purpose statement of the qualitative explanatory case study was to understand how a disproportionate diversity composition in senior leadership limits culture competence. That's one that we discussed within the workforce, limits the diversity of the workforce, and that's the second element, and restricts organizational performance. Again, you can see that they are aligned. The method and design. The method is a qualitative study. It's an in-depth investigation. And the reason why I chose that, and I guess I can talk a little bit about that later, but since I'm here now, is because, it gives you an opportunity to have conversation with the participants. to gain their experience and their perception on the matter. It focused on a social phenomena as opposed to a specific population. So it's on the lines of understanding a social problem. The design is a case study, explanatory. Again, it aligns with the method because it allows you to gain a deep understanding of the phenomenon, and it allows you to understand and explore the perception of others. And believe me, I really learned a lot from talking to the participants during this study. Population and sample. I pulled the participants from the LinkedIn platform. It was an undetermined number because I don't know how many people are on LinkedIn, but LinkedIn is a social environment from the business sector where business people gather and they communicate, interact, and connect. So, and I've known others to help others with different job opportunities. So it's very beneficial. The sample was purposeful sampling because I purposely pull people from the LinkedIn population because it is from a business environment. Uh, I used a sample size of 20 participants, uh, 5 from senior management, 5 from middle management, 5 from frontline management, and 5 support staff. And the reason I broke it out like that because I wanted to give each of I wanted to get their perspective from different levels, and I knew they would vary based on experience, based on your level. Of course, senior management probably would have more experience in terms of diversity, and their responses when I talked to them were more in depth than the frontline management. And I knew that was going to happen, but that's why I broke it out like that, so I can get a well-rounded balance of responses. The criteria is at least 5 years of work experience, have to be 18 years or older, and of course, the consent form was required. And I think I had like one person who didn't sign the consent form. They were disqualified from the study. Research questions. I broke them down in those 3 elements. Again, they are aligned with the purpose and the problem statement. How does a disproportionate diversity composition in senior leadership limit cultural competence within a workforce? Research question 2, how does a disproportionate diversity composition in senior leadership limit diversity of a workforce? Research question 3, how does a disproportionate diversity composition in senior leadership set restrictions on organizational performance? And these research questions, I was very mindful as I was going through my study, they did guide the study. Conceptual framework. I have 4 foundational theories that really explain the impact of diversity composition in senior leadership. So it was supported by these 4. There are many other ones out there, but I think we were only required to get a few, like 4 or 5. So I chose 4 that I thought would really explain the research study. Social identity theory. That's adopting behaviors from in-group members. So, and for example, if you are part of a group, and you have a tendency of adopting the traits and behaviors from, I guess, the majority of that group. So you really can't embrace your own individuality because in fear of maybe you might get terminated from the group, or maybe you might get criticized or what have you. So that's why they adopt those traits from the in-group members. And there again, that's not diversity. That's not fostering inclusive. A lot of companies are doing that. I've even experienced that, where we have different people from different backgrounds in a group, but they still feel isolated. The next one is status characteristics theories. Characteristics determine social worth. So for example, I mean, if it could be like political party, we're judged based on how much money we have. That can consider a high status of what neighborhood you're from, what state you live in, what football team you like. All these things can determine your worth. Social role theory. Diverse traits are not viewed as typical. So based on my research, the typical leader, the typical figure, leadership figure is the white, 6 foot built man. So that's the typical leader, a dominant man. So if you're the social role theory is saying maybe minorities don't fit that role, or maybe black people, maybe Asian folks don't fit that role, according to the stereotypes that were created over the years. Social entrepreneurship is kind of like the opposite of the first three that I described. Diverse backgrounds are needed to address social issues. And this is where we're trying to get. This is what we want to happen. We want to include everyone. This is an example of fostering inclusivity. We want to include everyone to handle our workplace complexities. Everyone in the ecosystem is very important. And this is our goal here. Social entrepreneurship is where we want to be. So I brought in a few points from the literature review, from the historical and current data. Of course, it's a lot of information, so I just highlight a couple. I spoke on 9 demographics in my literature review, from gender, religion, visible characteristics, non-visible characteristics, language, social class, race, ethnicity, and the list goes on. I used 9 of them. I utilized 9 of them, but here I pulled a few that I felt that was important to help us better understand the study. So in our historical data, if you look at gender, we're talking about a diversity gap here. Women are perceived to perform less than men, hence the reason the pay gap. So a woman can do the same job as a man, but get paid less because of the perception of a woman. And that's, again, that's something we have to really fix. Religion, leadership is a spiritual calling, according to Lee Taylor. When you're talking about transformational leadership, when you're talking about spiritual leadership, leaders that really impart and pour into their workforce so they can become better. And I believe that's part of religion. But the problem there is it could be threatened because a lot of people who are religious, they really don't know how to utilize the balance. And I think, according to my research, organizations were uncomfortable with that because people would probably focus more on their faith as opposed to putting more focus in on their jobs. So that's why, according to the research, that's why religion was discouraged. But I think there's a place for that in the workplace if leaders understand how to utilize that balance. I thought that was very interesting to point out. Current data, visible characteristics, physical traits associated with stereotypes. That could be your color, it could be your weight. Unfortunately, I'm an African-American person and I can't help that. And I know from my experience, I was judged and I probably have missed some opportunities because of my skin color. I'm thankful for the opportunities that I have, but I do believe that kind of restricted some of my opportunities. I've heard others say that too. And that's just the world we live in. People are very judgmental. They're very biased in interviews and different things. And, they may not explain it to you. They may not tell you, but there are some hidden biases there as to why others are afforded certain opportunities versus the others who aren't afforded certain opportunities. And I was kind of uncomfortable saying this and presenting this and writing this, but the facts are the facts. This is according to the research. And of course, I've had some personal experience. Social class, high class status creates better chances of survival and networking. So in other words, if you're part of what they call the good old boys club, you have a greater opportunity of networking and advancing through the ranks, as opposed to being a minority. Many minorities don't have that opportunity because of the perception. Instrumentation, I used 3 instruments to accomplish the study. Interviews were one of them. That was the most interesting one. I really enjoy that. Documents, company documents, and archival data. data from like government website, Census Bureau, things of that nature. And they, provided a lot of trends and reports on diversity. And this caused me to achieve triangulation, multiple data sources, to strengthen the credibility. And as I bounced back and forth from interviews, documents, and archival, I did find a lot of data corroborated, other methods. So data saturation. I remember I reached out to Dr. O about not having enough participants at first. Eventually they came on board and she told me, well, if I can stop at data saturation, but because I broke it out by 5 different levels of the organization, I didn't reach data saturation because the senior people had a different perspective versus the middle manager meant participants, and they had a different perspective than the frontline management folks, and then they had a different perspective than the frontline staff. So I didn't reach data saturation, but that was fine because I enjoyed each one of those individuals' experiences and perception on the matter. Interviews. I used 10 semi-structured, open-ended questions, and in many cases that led to other conversations and other questions. So I didn't restrict the participants. I didn't use structured. Use video conference, Zoom, and Microsoft Teams, believe it or not. Didn't know how to record on here. I didn't see the option, but I did use Microsoft Teams, mostly Zoom. Couple people use Microsoft Teams. Consent forms were conducted through HelloSign. That's a software where you can obtain an electronic signature from the participants. 20 participants were chosen, as I stated earlier, from different levels of the organization. Documents, company documents like policy, employee handbooks, diversity inclusion documents, and public websites. And when I looked at company documents, that informed me that there is a major focus on trying to get organizations up to the point where diversity is displayed in their culture. So that lets me know that they're struggling to get there from all the handbooks and all the documents and the policy. And they still hadn't accomplished it yet. But, my advice is to just keep going. We'll eventually get there. Maybe you need someone like me to come in after, since I've immersed myself into the research, not particularly me, but someone who has done an in-depth study on diversity that can kind of help spearhead that. Because when I was in diversity training, it was very limited, and we'll talk about that later. It was not nearly what I studied in this study. So, which really was very rigorous. So, and they talk about it in a superficial manner. It's very surface. Archival data, credible public sites. I did verify those public sites with some of you to make sure that I was using acceptable sites, because you can't use everything on the internet. Newsletters, summaries, and reports. Data analysis. Interview data was transcribed and imported to Navivo. I'm assuming that's how you pronounce that. It's a computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software that helps with the coding. All 3 data sources were coded. When I say data sources, I'm referring to the interviews, the company documents, and the archival data. They were all coded using interviews. I used an inductive approach. The codes were established from the data, so I tried to stay as close to the data as I can to create those codes or those categories. And in some instances, they're called nodes. So they're like 3 terms that you could use interchangeably: codes, categories, or nodes. Data was imported from Navivo from an Excel file. And an Excel file was very easy because you can organize the Excel file and then import it into the software. The three codes, nodes or categories, they were, in line with my research questions, problem statement, and the purpose. The cultural competence, I broke those out, those three factors: cultural competence, workforce, organizational performance, because uh, this is what we were saying. This is what I was saying at first, according to the problem. It limits and restricts these areas. Still speaking on data analysis, each data source contained three codes and four themes. And if I go back, these are the three codes at the bottom: culture, competence, workforce, organizational performance. And each of those codes has four themes, and the themes are the same in each of those codes: balance, positive impact, and I'll explain those; balance, negative impact, BNI; imbalance, positive impact, IPI; imbalance, negative impact, INI. So the first theme, the BPI, balance, positive impact, is saying essentially that means that there is a positive impact if there is a balance, diversity composition in senior leadership. And some of those positive impacts are develop culture competence in senior leadership. And one of the participants enlightened me on that, and then also the data. So let's just say if you have a balanced, diverse leadership, and you have a Caucasian person who has all African Americans in his or her vertical that, he or she manages, and you have his or her counterpart is an African American woman. Well, that African American woman can consult with her peer who may be having an issue trying to manage a minority workforce. She can let you know how to do that because she can connect with the African American workforce because she's an African American. And that's the advantage of having different a diversity balance in leadership, because you can talk among each other to get a better understanding of your workforce. And I thought that was very interesting. Multi-generational interaction. So some organizations they rather have young people because they're more into technology, and then some rather have the older generation because they're more wise, or they're wiser, excuse me, and they can teach the younger people. But here, multi-generation is just like the first point I made. The older people can teach the younger people how to, do things, and of course, the younger people can show the older people about the technology, because we are in a technological era. The LGBTQIA, leaders create an environment for those who identify same-sex attraction employees. So if you have someone of the LGBTQIA community in senior leadership, those people are the people in the workforce, it'll create a comfortable environment for them, because a lot of times they are stigmatized, probably more than any demographic. And to have someone they can connect to would kind of make that environment more comfortable for them. Culture class. A homogeneous leadership faces difficulty managing a diverse workforce. Of course, if you're all black if you're a black leader trying to manage an all white workforce, that might be kind of difficult because you don't understand their needs. So that's why diversity is very important. And Baruti considers that as a culture class. Theme 2, balanced negative impact. So essentially that's saying that due to a balanced diversity composition in leadership, there is negative impact. And you would think that's ironic, but it's very interesting. A diverse leadership is useless if inclusivity is not fostered. So you can have all the pieces, of the puzzle there. You can have, the different demographics present, but if those decision makers and those company officials do not know how to foster inclusivity, there remains a problem, even if the diversity composition is balanced. Minority leaders encounter issues with self-identification, just like I mentioned before, the example of the in group. I don't many minorities don't feel like they can be themselves or they can voice their opinion because they feel that the stereotypical leadership figure controls the narrative. So therefore they just kind of fall in line just to survive and not really express their self-identification and what they think. Inability to network with others who do not share traits. That's a problem if you have diversity. When only maybe the white race or the black race network with only the black people, or the white leaders only network with the white leaders, that remains a problem in that diverse environment because there's no inclusivity being fostered there. Theme 3, imbalanced positive impact. So basically what that's saying is because of an imbalanced diversity composition, there is some there are some benefits there. Interestingly enough, imbalanced leadership is beneficial if the right leader in place. So for example, if I have an Hispanic leader managing an all-white workforce or Hispanic leader managing an all-black workforce, you would think that there's a problem there. According to the research, there is. But if the right leader is in place and he's willing to understand the needs of the workforce, he's willing to have the conversation and ask questions and really make an effort to find out what the workforce, how he can better manage the workforce, then that's a benefit. With an all-white leadership structure or an all-black leadership structure managing a different workforce, somebody a workforce that doesn't share the same characteristics. So there are some benefits there. And as I stated, interact to understand the workforce. All millennial leadership may be sufficient due to technical expertise. Gentry considered this the wired generation. Again, that imbalance. So it's basically saying if you have all millennials as leadership, which I don't feel would be a good situation. I don't feel like the company will survive because maybe a lot of the wisdom is lacking there, which is why we need some of the older people in those roles. But according to Gentry here, he say it might be sufficient because of the technological era that we're in, and companies are moving toward automation and different technologies. So this is where the millennials would come in and and be beneficial to the organization. But again, I don't think that it's wise to have an all millennial leadership structure because that it might be a big knowledge gap in terms of how to do other things, how to manage, and they have the technology now, but the other aspects of leadership may be, may need some improvement. The last theme 4, imbalanced negative impact. So essentially that's saying there is negative impact due to imbalanced leadership structure. And this is where we would probably all agree, even if we didn't know anything about the study. I mean, we feel like since there's an imbalance, there's going to be a negative impact, where we saw that's not the case all the time. But here it is the case. Participant stated minority voice is not heard. So essentially, if I have an all black leadership and, if they're managing white and black, a lot of times with unconscious bias, we tend to go to our own. We tend to recruit ideas from our own, and a lot of times we don't even realize it. We tend to give people who share the same traits different projects and different opportunities. So the people who are different in the workforce, they feel like their voice is not heard, or they feel like there are certain opportunities that may be compromised because they don't share the same ethnicity. Unfair treatment, favoritism, basically what I just said. Unconscious bias, we talked about that. Prohibits inclusive work environment. For certainly, this does not promote an inclusive work environment. Recommendations for leadership. From this study, I recommend that leaders learn how and focus on fostering inclusivity. And I believe that's what organizational leaders and company officials need to do. Learn how to include everyone, not just have the numbers there, not just have the different demographics there, but include everybody. When I was doing research, it was an interesting part I read. You can invite everybody to the party, but the question is, do you invite everyone to dance? And I think that's what's going on here. We're inviting everyone to the party, but we're not inviting everyone to dance. Again, there's a problem with fostering inclusivity. Everybody on your team, everybody in that work environment should feel part of the team. But from talking to different individuals in the industry, that's not always the case. Effective diversity inclusive training. I feel like training needs to be a little more in-depth instead of surface. I mentioned earlier in the presentation that a lot of companies are providing diversity training, but they're not really doing a rigorous job in digging down into the real problem. Unconscious bias awareness. I believe a lot of leaders need to be aware of their unconscious bias, and I think that's probably part of training. You know, somebody needs to do that. Somebody needs to come and conduct that in-depth training so that it can cause some self-reflection. You know, as leaders, we can look at ourselves and hopefully identify the unconscious bias that has been there for a long time. And hopefully we can see a change for that. I think leaders need to involve themselves in those types of training, and maybe we can see a difference in our world. Okay. Conclusion. Doing this study, it really expanded my knowledge, and hopefully you can attest to that from hearing the presentation. You know, I don't look at diversity on the surface anymore. I really immersed myself in the research, and it was very insightful. Talking with the participants, you know, writing the literature review, it really opened my eyes. And as a manager, I would like to focus more on managing inclusion. I see the problem, I've experienced the problem, and because I'm in a position to make a difference, I would like to take what I learned and apply that to my role and manage inclusion better and making everyone on the team feel a part of the team. Publish work on diversity and inclusion. I know Dr. O has come to me and asked me about published work, so I would like to do that to take this work further. Reflect in leadership style. As I stated earlier, I would like to reflect what I've learned more in my leadership style. And then, you know, maybe teach other leaders. I would like to, you know, find myself eventually in a role, maybe in a company's training, or maybe a diversity consultant where I can go around the world and teach people how to foster inclusivity. Yeah, so I think that I can be instrumental in doing that, in helping out in that, in diversity and inclusion, because we're not there yet, according to the research. We're trying to get there though. And before I conclude this, I want to thank each of you, Dr. Overby, Dr. Gordon, and Dr. Lupo, for helping me on this journey, giving me guidance, correcting things, and giving me feedback to get me to this point. So I'm very grateful. There are a lot of frustrating times I experienced. There were some changes in the process with APA manuals, and had to go back through and modify the paper, but it was all a learning lesson. I now look at that as an opportunity to learn what I have learned. So I want to thank each and every one of you for being instrumental on this journey. Do you have any questions or comments?
Nate, thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you.
We'll go ahead and start questions now. Dr. Gordon, would you like to take the first question?
Yeah. First of all, Nate, that was a great presentation and a very timely topic. One of the things that I wanted to ask a question about, as you know, well, you might not know, Dr. Overby and I have written a book chapter on unconscious bias. And one of the things that we found out, it ties in with yours, is that, you know, training may be the answer and it may not be the answer. How, in your opinion, do you take training and then put it to application, because you can give all the training in the world and everybody says yes, yes, and then they leave the training room and it goes out their ears. Is there a way to possibly tie in? I know when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry, part of our annual review was behaviors. And so can you tie in this type of thing to behaviors so that you can actually measure somebody and how well they do? Is that in your industry, is that something they could do?
Yeah, I think with the training, how it ties in is I think training facilitators would have to be very creative in allowing participants to see their unconscious bias. Maybe they could show them a video or something. Maybe they can do a skit. I don't know, maybe they can get maybe a black group of people and a white group of people and see how, someone responds to that, just to demonstrate that, so they'd have to get creative, and I think it can happen, if you can, get creative with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My other question is, when you do your research, we all go in with a certain level of preconceived notions.
Mm-hmm.
What were the surprises that you found as you went through this process?
Well, one thing that surprised me was how honest it was. It was brutally honest in some, in some aspects. Just like, for example, they said that the researcher was saying something to the effect that some people perceive Black women, they don't really honor Black folks, Black women in a role because that's a dominant male role, right? And if a woman does occupy a role and she takes on those traits, then she's considered the B word. Right. But if she's not strong enough for the role. So it's like, will they ever have an opportunity? And that surprised me. And another thing that surprised me in the research was that, certain perception can connect you to the past. For example, they were telling me dark-skinned people kind of would sometimes remind others of slavery, being a slave.
Oh, wow.
Things of that nature. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty interesting.
Oh, that's all my questions. Thank
Yeah.
you much.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. Dr. Lupo?
I think she's muted.
Sorry about that. It just took me a minute to come off mute. I would hit it and then it would lag and I'd hit it again and then I'd go back on mute. But anyways, that was excellent. I really, really enjoyed it. And often, we sit through these presentations quite a bit and you had my attention the whole time. I think that you're a very dynamic speaker and I thought that the topic was interesting, but the way you presented it really brought life to it. And you could tell that you really had done the research and you really kind of knew what you were talking about. So very, very, very good job. If you were going to redo your study, is there anything that you would change, not looking back and kind of like going back into it?
Yes, I think I would focus more on the inclusivity part. And that's what I got from the literature review, and that's what I got from the participants. Like I said, we got the numbers, we have the different demographics, but there's a problem in fostering inclusivity, making everybody feel a part of the team, making everybody involved. So I would probably focus on that because that appears to be the big problem. Companies got it down. We're diverse, but the inclusivity part is missing.
Yeah, that was a really important point that you made that, that I forget even what you said, but something about going to the dance and then you asking the people in the dance. That's a perfect analogy for what you were discussing. I think that you should consider doing consulting in this area. First of all, I think that you're a great speaker and you keep people's attention, which is, a really big part of doing
with my Southern accent.
But also, years ago, I actually was sitting through a presentation from a consultant who was consulting for Hyundai here in Alabama. And what they were doing is it was diversity and inclusion consulting, because there was such a disconnect between the Asian population and the American population working together, and also working overseas when they would have to travel and stuff like that. So I definitely feel like there's a need for consultants in that area. So it might be something for you to consider, just kind of like as a side gig. I know when I first graduated from school with my PhD, I did a lot of consulting, and it was just like on the side to make a few extra dollars, but it was really fun, and it was a great way to get my research out there. So it'd be something that you could consider.
Yeah, I definitely want to focus on that. Definitely want to give back to the community.
But that's all I had. So good job.
Thank you.
Well, Dr. Gordon and Dr. Lupo have taken two of my favorite questions, so I'm going to ask you another favorite question. You obviously, Nate, have grown as a scholar and a researcher through this process. I've seen the quality of your work and your desire to investigate and dig deep. It's been very evident through the process and through our time together. But how did this process change you as a person, or did it change you as a person?
Well, of course, I think we always have areas to improve upon. It just, I guess when you go through something like this, it just really shows how strong you are, and it shows you how much tenacity you have and commitment and dedication. So that really reinforced that because you had to have that in order to get to this point, going back and forth and doing all the changes. And it just lets me know that I can be committed to something and finish it and follow through and not give up, no matter, the difficulty, no matter the resistance. If you want to get to the goal, you just have to work through it. So,
Excellent. And then my final question for you is, if you had someone come to you and say they were thinking about doing a doctoral program, what one piece of advice would you give them to maybe make their journey a little bit easier?
Well, I wouldn't try to discourage them, but I would be very honest with them. I would say, first of all, everything you learned in high school, as far as writing is concerned, it probably won't be applicable in scholarly writing. It's just like the rules completely changed, because you and I had a conversation and I'm like, well, this is how we were taught. You were like, not in scholarly writing. So I would tell them to be prepared to write on a scholarly level. And some things you probably have to just, discount that you've learned in order to be a scholarly writer.
Okay,
That
thank
is
you.
true.
I have no further questions, Dr. Lupo. Dr. Gordon, do you have any additional questions?
No,
Nope. Okay, I am going to stop the recording now. Hopefully I know how to do that.